Okay, so today we're going to cover section 10. It's called factor by grouping. What we just did in lesson 5.9 is we used this technique where we had to turn our trinomial into a 4-term polynomial that we could factor by grouping. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first example here. Now, I notice this looks like it's a little confusing because what they've already done here is they've already factored it for you. So notice the x plus y and the x plus y. This is what's in common, so that you write that once, and then you take your two GCFs, the 5 and the w, and that goes in the other parentheses. The next one is the same thing, but notice on example B, see this subtraction sign here in between? Notice this is going to indicate that this is a -1 here. So again, you're going to take the two things that are in common, the m plus 4n, write it once, it's the GCF, and then take the two things that are outside of the parentheses, and again, you assume that's a -1, and you put that in a parentheses, and we're done. So this is a lot simpler than what you were doing because it's already factored for you. Now, right here, where I've got it like starred in pink here, it will help if you can recognize opposites. So, for example, if this is your factor, x minus y, when you put a negative sign and you group it in a parentheses, remember that negative sign outside can represent the word opposite. So basically what you're saying is the opposite of x minus y. A lot of kids also think of this as -1 out front, and then they distribute it. -1 times x, -1 times -y, and then it turns into this. Now you could also rewrite it, and if you'd rather, instead of putting the -x out front plus y, you could rearrange it and put the y first minus x, either way. So be able to recognize opposites, especially when we're doing this factor by grouping. So for example, look at example 2. So notice in the parentheses here, a minus 3 and 3 minus a look very similar. However, remember to factor by grouping, these two things need to look identical. So in order to make them look the same, these are opposites, and what I can do is divide out or multiply it by -1. So what I can do here is I could say, instead of multiplying this by, I could change this and multiply this by a positive, multiply the whole thing by -1. So then this would become a positive 2a, and then these signs would flip. This would become a -3a and a positive a. And then if I flip it around, it becomes a minus 3. So whenever they ask you to factor it by grouping, if they have the same number or the same letter, but the signs are off, see if multiplying that parenthesis by a -1 will change the signs so they look the same. So for here, what I'm going to have is this one stays the same. If I multiply this whole term by -1, this again becomes a positive 2a, and now this will flip around so it looks the same. So again, you're going to write one of these, write it once, and then now take the two greatest common factors that are outside the parentheses and put them together. Now at this point, you should FOIL this. If it doesn't go back or doesn't look similar, you know you've done something wrong. Let's try another example. Let's look at example 3. So here it says to group common factors and then factor out the greatest common factor. So let's go ahead and rewrite this. So I have 2ab minus 6ac plus 3b minus 9c. So I'm going to group them. Within each group, I'm looking for a greatest common factor. Out of my first group, I can pull out a greatest common factor of 2a. So I'm going to divide both of them by 2a, and I'm left with b minus 3c. Now I'm going to look at my second group. I'm going to look to see what is my greatest common factor between 3b and 9c, and that is going to be 3. So again, I put the greatest common factor I'm dividing by out here. I do the division, and if after I divide, if these did not look the same, then this would tell me that I could not factor this by grouping, and I'd have to try something else. Or maybe I pulled the wrong greatest common factor out. So then now, for your final answer, you're going to take one of the underlined green things, and then now the two GCFs. Put them together, and there's your final factored answer. Now again, you can rearrange things if you'd like. However, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get the same answer. They rearranged it. If you look at the top of for solution 2, they rearranged the terms, or they pulled out a different GCF. So either way. All right, let's look at example 4. You will have something like this on the quiz. So we saw it last night when we did numbers 44, and then the night before 43. But you're going to get something like this on the quiz. So you have to realize that we could have perfect square trinomials or the difference of two squares. So what we're going to do here is we're going to think of part of this as a perfect square trinomial. So what we can do here is regroup some stuff. So here, we can think of this as a trinomial squared, or a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to rewrite this and sort of group it. Okay, so I'm going to put parentheses around this. So actually this is a negative. And what I'm going to do here...
Good morning, Mr. Walker.
Let me come over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this, and I'm going to make this, let me just do this by itself first. This is actually going to turn into 2q minus r and 2q minus r. If I FOIL that, it will go back to what's in that parentheses. Now, what I've got right here, this is a perfect square, and this whole thing is a perfect square. So when I go to factor this, it's going to be the difference of two squares. So I'm going to put 2p and then minus one of these. And then 2p plus one of these. This is how we're going to factor the difference of two squares. Now, for the first one, I have to distribute the negative sign. So 2p minus 2q plus r. Over here, nothing to distribute, so I'm just going to rewrite everything. And then this would be your final factored answer. There's no like terms, so you're done. So minus r. So again, this lesson is very similar to what you just did. When you go to look at the beginning problems, they're super easy because they're already factored for you. So for example, let's look at oral exercise number 1. So notice here, it's already factored for you. So you take one of them, the a minus 2's, you're going to write it, and then you're going to take the two GCFs, or the things outside the parentheses. And then that what goes into the other parentheses. So that would be your final answer. So on the beginning part of the homework, that's all you're doing, is they've already factored it for you. Now if the signs look backwards, that's when you'll pull out a -1. So I know on Canvas it doesn't have the problems, but go ahead and for tonight you'll do the evens 2 through 60, and then for tomorrow you'll do the odds 1 through 59. Now if you want to knock them all out just so you get extra practice, you can do that. But we have a quiz on this on Thursday. So tomorrow we'll go over the answers to the evens, and then I'm going to give you a quiz review, and then whatever time remains you'll work on some more practice of this, which will be the odds. Anybody have any questions on this factor by grouping? Okay.